conversation, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. And one of the reasons this is such an exciting conversation, frankly, is because all of you, many of you in this room, have played a leadership role in making changes in this part of the world for a very long time. And the opportunity to get to exchange ideas with you is really very powerful. For those of you who haven't had a chance, I don't mean to sound like the bookseller, but I read Grace and Grit, and if you get a chance to read it, the first question you'll want to say is, one of the first questions you'll want to ask is, oh my God, how did you do it? And so it's a really great book. It's a very fast read, and I know they have some in back for sale. But if you get a chance, you want to make sure you get a chance to read it. So let me jump in with questions, if that's okay. So, all of us in this room, and especially I would say the labor leaders, the people who are elected to their union offices, have really been struggling in their workplaces. And I think to a degree that many of you have felt like you can't go on, like what else could possibly happen to you? And I have to say, when you read the book, you will feel that way less, because the odds were so much more challenging for you, I would argue, than they are for us. But I wondered, what inspired you to write the book? Who did you want to read it, and what did you want them to get out of it?
I gave up, I gave up a real good offer early for a TV movie to keep my rights to my book, simply because I wanted the book for the young people, like the young people who came tonight that's working for the assemblyman over here, and the other young people, the mothers who brought their young sons and their daughters. I wanted that book to leave the history for young people. It would tell my side of the story and go along with the history that's out there in all of the law books that the college and high school students are studying and will be studying for years to come, because it did make a difference. And it points out to young people that each person has a voice and you have a vote, and we have to exercise that and take advantage of it, but we need to do it the right way, the educated way. And organizations like the American Association of University Women and all of the groups across the country, I didn't get the law changed by myself. There were a lot of us involved, people from coast to coast, north to south, lobbied for the Ledbetter Bill, and that tells this great union hall of people here this evening that you can make a difference by staying together, working together, and keeping your voice on the same page. But I gave up the movie rights and the movie early on, and I needed that money desperately because I was in very poor financial shape. As you know, I did not get any money. And my lawyer said, well, Lily, that's a lot of money. And I said, yes, it is. But my story, for it to be correct, and me to hold on to the book rights, I had to do that. And I gave it up and bypassed it. And things have worked out, not as good as it could have been, but I'm leaving the book for history, for young people to read and know that they can.
And I appreciate your point about how important that is for young people that are here today, and it's very powerful. And I wonder, just to take this back in history a little bit, if you could talk about what it was like to grow up in Possum Trot, Alabama. And I say that because as I was reading the book, I thought, what? Did I say that right? Possum Trot. Yeah, Possum Trot, Alabama, and I thought she made that up, but you didn't. And I wondered if you could talk about that related to, there are all these beautiful little vignettes in your book about when you have these kind of inspirational moments. And I wondered if you could talk about Possum Trot and the families whose parents worked at Goodyear and what that meant to you, as you're in your growing up time.
Well, coming from one of the poorest counties in Alabama, and now the rural section, my family did not farm. In fact, we were not even rich enough to own a farm. But my grandfather had one, and so my mother, as I was growing up, had to make sure that I learned a work ethic. And my mother was an extremely hard worker and hard disciplinarian, and so I had to be taught That was the only way. A young person in the South, back in those early years, and I'll date myself, I was born in 1938, so that puts me way back. And so the only way I could earn any money was picking cotton. And I hated it. As a young woman, my fingers were picked and bleeding, and I didn't like that. It was hot, and the bugs were flying around your head. And but also my best friend at school, her father worked in Goodyear. She didn't have to pick cotton, and she wore nice ready-made clothes to school. She wore silk underwear, and I wore homemade cotton. And you know the difference, in every 2 or 3 years she came to school, my dad got a new Mercury. They had a new car. Every summer they went to Mobile to the beach. We never went anywhere. And so I started to relate the differences, and I set my goals. My cousin and I, who's mentioned in the book, when we were in those cotton fields on those hot, dusty afternoons, we swore we'd get out of that cotton field and we'd never go back, and I did. But we set our goals high and our ambitions, and that's what young people need to do today. But also, history is important. You should never forget where you came from and your beginnings, because it does set the record of who you really are. And you can't forget the history. It's important.
So again, as I was reading the book, I was imagining this family that could go on vacations, and I know for many of us, we came from struggling families as well, and I was, thinking about my first day of school clothes all being homemade, and what's funny is now I totally appreciate my mom doing that, and I was like, oh my God, this is horrifying. And so I was sort of thinking about the experience you were having, and this kind of image that if you were a Goodyear family, you had one way of life, and if you were anybody else, you had another way of life. And for you to work all the way up to get into Goodyear, which was, as a child, such an incredible dream, and as an adult, ended up being kind of a nightmare. And I wondered if you could talk about your experience at Goodyear, and talk about why you stayed there, even under such tough conditions.
Yes, that's really the basis of, I had a 35-year working career. Prior to going to Goodyear, I had been Assistant Financial Aid Director at Jacksonville State University. Prior to that, I had been the District Manager for H&R Block, managing 16 locations, 14 the book says. I had 14 when I started, and ended up, I left them with 16 when I left to go to work at Goodyear. But the Goodyear plant in Gadsden was built in 1929. It was not unionized at first, and I heard those stories about how the people had to go through all the hardships until they did get unionized. But that was built in 1929, and they had 5 divisions in the 70s, and they built the radio power plant in Gadsden in 1976. Business Week magazine did a spread talking about their new management philosophy, and they were incorporating African Americans and minorities and women into their workforce, and I wanted a job there. So I felt like that I'd be a trailblazer. I'd be one of the first women to hold that job. So I hired in. I was almost 40 when I went to work there February 5th, 1979, Element Squadron Training Program, which was a supervisor at the time. There were 5 of us, and I did get assigned to the radio division. And that was a great job for a woman. It's like coaching a little league team. If you've got all your players and you know your game and you know the strategies and you've got your schedule, your supplies, your components that you need, and everything that's required, and you go in, you can build your product and put out a good product and be safe and adhere to all the company guidelines. But I was one of the only women. I was on night shift. In fact, if I had to go call overtime in around 2 o'clock in the morning for 3 a.m., and the women always answered the phone, the woman would say, "You're who?" Lily Ledbetter at Goodyear, and I'm calling to see if Charlie wants to come to work at 3. Wonderful. And then he'd come in the next morning, cuss me out, take his name off of the overtime list, because the men had never went home and told their wives, "Hey, they got a woman working at the plant now." I get past my wife. That went on for a while, but you have to figure those things out. But the men had never worked with a woman for a boss, and a lot of them would tell me they took orders at home, they wouldn't take orders there. But I said, I'm not here to give orders, I'm here as your person to bring you your schedule, your check, schedule your vacation, make sure that you're treated fairly, and I will tell you the truth. I won't lie to you, and I'll treat you as well as you allow me to. And I work well with the union. I like the union contract because that gave me a good description and a good guideline to go by, and I really liked it. It was Steelworkers Union, and they were good to work with, and I had a good relationship with all of the union officials, and so it worked out well. But it was very difficult because the men above me and my co-workers in the same position had heard the company say, she's got a good track record. She's going places with Goodyear. And their objective was that they made sure that I didn't go anywhere except out the door. And so they were taking bets on how long I could survive. But the union men and women, Steelworkers Union in Gadsden, Alabama, kept my back covered. In fact, I was gotten on to a time or two for pushing some of the young men for working so hard. And they didn't know what had happened, but they had seen what was going on. And I was having my schedule changed by some of my coworkers. And so the scheduler would come through at night, make sure I had the right. And I went through a lot of hardships like that, but I was almost 40 when I hired in, and my goal was I was going to stay. They were not going to run me off. And I had heard the stories, I had seen what had happened to the African Americans, and what few women had been there, they would just give it up and go get another job. But they were younger, and they had good educations, and they were more out there for younger women. By the time I had figured out what was going on, I was about 45. So that was the main reason. I get that question a lot, why did I stay? When you read the book, and you read about all the things that was done to my car, my vehicles, that was not union people, that was co-workers. And I could have lost my life in several of those cases. And I kept objecting to the company until they finally would allow me to park my car inside the gate. And the only way that I turned around calling people at home at night, the name of the book is called Grace and Grit. I did ballroom dancing competition for 8 years, and that's where the Grace came from in the name of the book, even though my granddaughter's named Grace. But the Grace came about simply because of the ballroom dancing. And after that company did an article about that, then I could call them in at night, and when the wives would answer the phone at 2 a.m., they want to know where I took the lessons, how much did they cost, and did I think anybody could do it. So that turned it around for everybody to get a respect. But from day one, after the union men and women watched me work and worked with me, I was known as Miss Lilly, and I retired as Miss Lilly. So that was quite an outstanding feat because that was showing respect. I had a lot of the craftsmen, when I was short of help, they would do a 2-person job with just one person so that I would not lose any production time. I had the best record of any of them, but they wouldn't own up to it.
You know, when I read the book, one of the things that I was a little surprised at, and I will admit, I've never been on I've been on a construction site in organizing, and my dad was a carpenter, but I was astounded at the way you were treated by your male colleagues, and some of it felt physically threatening. I mean, the language was inappropriate, the way, people, one gentleman, well, not gentleman, one human being-ish, touching you inappropriately, and I wonder how you were able to come back to work in an environment that felt so hostile all the time. Like even going home, and I know in the book it says that you didn't share things that happened at work and home, and I can totally understand that. I have a very tall husband too, that would not be good. But I wondered, how did you get the energy to come back into that environment and continue to fight every day?
Well, there were college tuition bills at home to be paid, the mortgage was to be paid, the car payment was to be paid, and there were a lot of expenses, and times were not easy during the 80s. You remember we had high gas prices, we had jobs hard to get. It was even difficult to even buy a new vehicle in some places in the early 80s. But it was a difficult time for the American middle-class family, and everybody was struggling, and so I couldn't afford to deal with it. And I'm not a quitter. I've never been a quitter. I'll never throw in the towel. I will see things through because you have to. You can't quit. And but it got rough and it was hard, but it was really a good job for a woman, and I wanted to set the record. The other women had quit and left, and a lot of them, they hired a female that was had finished West Point. She spent some time in the regular Army, very sharp, training her to be the first female plant manager. And she ended up going to Oklahoma, Lawton, Oklahoma for a while, and then went to Tyler, Texas. And when she got there, the union set her up, or her co-workers set her up with a union problem, which she didn't do. But her objective was she could either stay and fight when she was in her early 40s, or she could leave. And she chose to leave, which was the easy way. And equal employment will tell you that keeps your record clean, because once you file a charge, it's in the record books from then on. And I filed a charge in the early 80s because of the incident you just mentioned, because they moved me out of my job and put me into a quality control job, basically, working with this gentleman, and that's all he had on his mind from the time we got to work until we left was sex, 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 and I had to have sex with him if I intended to keep my job. And the equal employment people back then, as well as today, you've got to go in and do a face-to-face interview. But I knew that Friday, if I didn't get a charge filed, I wouldn't have a job. And maybe it was a Thursday, I don't remember exactly. But anyway, I called Birmingham, Alabama, and I begged the man to file a charge of sexual harassment. He said, "Lady, we don't do them that way." I said, "I understand, but if you don't do this, I won't have a job next Tuesday when my superior would come back against me." And so he filed it. He filled it out. They notified Goodyear, and the investigation was on. And I did get my job back. I did win the right to sue. And so that brings me to the point where a lot of people today say Goodyear tries to convince people. I knew in 1980s, early 80s, that I was being paid less. Well, let me tell you, if I'd known I was being paid $10 to $15 less per hour than the males, I would have been filing a charge, because I knew where equal employment was. I needed that money for my family. I needed it to send them to college and do the things they needed to do. But I filed that charge, and after the investigation at the Equal Employment Office, I got my job back and was moved away from the man.
And then I have to say, when I read the book, there were a bunch of different times I said, "Oh my God," especially when her car got sabotaged. And her car was sabotaged many times, but one that could have caused you to be in a car accident that could have killed you.
That's right.
And that's when she fought to make sure her car could get parked in the right space. So there were all these times you took a stand where you just said, "You know what? No." So that's why I thought that claim was so bogus. When I know you mentioned it in the book, but I also read it in an article and like that. If you would file for sexual harassment, you would certainly let people know. And by the way, you're not paying me right.
That's right.
Anyway, so
That's right.
I'm with you on that. I want to know if you could just share with all of us, when did you decide you were going to just take the stand? And if you could describe the moment that you decided you were going to fight over equal pay. Like, what was that moment like? What was that morning like? It's so vivid in your book, and I wondered if you could just share that with everyone.
Well, how I found out was when I went into work, and I worked the night shift. You had to have 25 years to rate day shift. So I never got that privilege in my 20 years there. So I went in to do my 12-hour shift, and I take my mail out of my little mailbox at work, and this fourth of a sheet of torn paper falls out. It has my name and 3 men. We had the exact same job, just a different shift. And my pay was down to the dollar exact. And it was an odd amount, so I knew theirs was. And they were making 40% more than I was. I was devastated, and I was humiliated, and immediately embarrassed. I looked around first to see if I could figure out who left the note, if somebody was watching me. I couldn't see anyone. And I thought, how will I ever get through a 12-hour shift? Because I had to go out on the floor and walk around people all night, different departments, and try to function in a responsible work performance. How will I do this? How will I hold my head up and go through this? I went in the ladies' lounge and walked around and tried to muster up enough of courage to do this. And then I reflected back. My son at the time was in college, so I thought, those bills have to be paid. I can't afford to go home. So I went out, and first though I thought about the overtime. All of those hours. My peer had had a heart attack. I worked 2 months straight, 12-hour shifts, every night of the week, every night. And to be a manager, you had to be there an hour early, and you had to stay an hour over, so that was 14 hours, 7 nights a week. I would get so exhausted until weekends. If my husband was off, he'd drive me to and from so I could sleep that extra 45 minutes each way. Because now it's illegal to do that. They don't allow that anymore. You only get to work 17 days straight without a night off. But it's extremely hard because on a couple of occasions when I did that, I ended up in the hospital dehydrated. But I had a lot of overtime, and I immediately thought about those 2 jobs that my son had worked, trying to take a full load in college. And my daughter had worked full-time in some jobs, and then the summer she might take off to work, which was a good experience, but yet they did not be able to get the kind of degrees that they would have liked to have had. My son wanted a law degree, my daughter wanted a medical degree, and they had to settle for lesser degree education. And then what they did, they got 2 degrees instead of doing a degree and a minor, which has helped them to be promoted and get better jobs. But this is not right. And this is not because I wouldn't work. I was there every time they called. And I was one of the people who was snowed in during the blizzard of '93 because being a woman, I knew it was important. I had to be there. So I went to work in the snow and ice, and it was very difficult. And I got myself home. They did not get me moved. They got all the men moved, but they didn't get Lily Lester. She handled it herself. I got a union man to drive me home, and that was fine. But, they just didn't recognize. They didn't want to. They hated to admit a woman can't do the job. A woman can be a good manager. And it was really, really hard that way. But I think I got off track on your question.
It was great.
My story can go in a lot of directions.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about when you decided to file a court case. And I know you ended up with a great attorney, and maybe just share with people about that piece, because it is pretty powerful.
That's where I did it. I knew I would.
No, I thought the blizzard was good too.
Yeah. That is good because, I thought about it that night, and I did get out on the floor and start my job. And about halfway through the night, it was just like a ton of bricks. I thought, oh my gosh, my retirement is based on my salary. My 401k was 10%, matched by 6% stock. And my contributory retirement that had kicked in 6 months after going to work for Goodyear was matched by a percentage from Goodyear. So that's another loss. And today, my Social Security. And there's nothing in the law that if you miss that, you can't go back and you win a lawsuit. You can't get those lost retirements. They're gone. They're gone forever. There's no way you can regain them back. They're there's no way, nothing in the law that allows you to get your lost overtime. And what you're entitled to, when I thought all night then, the rest of the night, I thought about this. And I put my head back, my shoulders back, and I got home. I told my husband about it and what I had learned. And I said, I haven't got to file a charge with the Equal Employment Commission in Birmingham unless you object. But I can tell you up front, if I start it, I won't quit. And we'll be in this fight for at least 8 years. He said, what time do you want to leave? I went to Birmingham, he drove me over there, and I filed my charge. And the lady I got was named Ollie Crooms. She's mentioned in the book. She's now deceased, but she stayed with me for 3 hours or more. And she didn't go to the restaurant, she didn't get coffee, she didn't take a break. She drug out of me because it's embarrassing when you hold a position with a corporation that should carry a lot of respect, and you've got to say, they're not paying me fair, they're not treating me fair. It sounds like you're a whiner, you're a complainer, you're a crybaby. And I just couldn't bring the words out, but she drug them out. And my lawyer has thanked her several times for filling that paper out so thoroughly. And in a few months, about 9 months, the investigator with the Equal Employment in Birmingham, Alabama, he called and he said, you've got one of the best cases we have ever seen. But we're short of help, we're understaffed, and we're backlogged. You probably can get to trial faster if you get your own attorney. I found an attorney. I started researching and I found a young attorney named John Goldfarb with the second largest firm in Birmingham, Alabama. Goodyear hired the largest firm, but I took the smallest one. I took the next largest one, and John Goldfarb took my case and he worked with me. We started in 1999. I filed a charge in 1998. He and I got together in 1999. He had 2 children. And when we finished the verdict, he had 4. He said, we got to quit this case, this is all it is. But he was great to work with, and he was extremely smart. And he took my case. The book says pro bono. He's about to kill me on that because it's on a contingents basis. Pro bono means absolutely free. Contingents meant his firm would have gotten 50%. It didn't matter to me because I'll tell you, once I saw that note, from that time on, to me, it was about the right thing. This was not right. It was illegal. It was against the law. It was about what was right. We could not get to federal court, though, until January of 2003. It's very difficult to get on the court calendar. One of the federal judges in Alabama squashed all my cases together. I had 4 lawsuits. And when we finally got to federal court after a week of testimony, and 2 women who worked for Goodyear, one of them was still working, they testified on my behalf. And when one of the lawyers asked one of the girls why she never complained, she said, I was a divorced mother supporting a handicapped son, living paycheck to paycheck. I couldn't afford to ask about my pay because Goodyear said if you discuss your pay or with any coworker or ask about it working here, you will not have a job. So no one ever did. I tried that once, but it didn't work. So it was very hard to find anything out. But he took that case and we started working, and then when Kathy testified and then Rita testified, she was still working, and she caught a lot of flack over that. There was an African American. He was sitting in the hall waiting to testify, and they didn't call him because of the 2 women. They sealed it because the lawyer had on a 4x8 whiteboard my salary and all the men. And we started the first 2 years, we made the same pay as long as they did the COLA. But when they went from COLA to pay for performance, then my pay got out of line. In other words, I didn't get any money most of the time. And when I did get a raise, I didn't know if it was what the men were getting or not. And that went on for a number of years, and it really got way out of line. But then in the early 90s, Gadsden built the light truck radio division, started that plant. And they handpicked 4 managers for that. And I was one of those. But getting back to the court case, after that week, the jury came back on Friday afternoon and they found for the plaintiff $3.8 million. That was the best news I had ever heard. And the lawyer had told me, do not make any outward emotion, don't say yes or cry or look at the judges or look at the lawyers, and just look at the wall and keep a straight face. It was awfully hard. That was hard. But I sat on my hands and I didn't make any outward emotion. But when I heard that $3.8 million, it was just, that was really, I thought, very good, because it sent a message. We don't like major corporations taking advantage of little middle-class people. But the judge said, let me explain to the group, she's only entitled to $300,000. Congress put that cap on in 1991. My $3 billion dropped to $300,000. And on back pay, you can only go back 2 years. So I was entitled, according to the judge, $30,000 per year. And then the Supreme Court took it away. Alito said I should have filed my charge in the early 80s when I got that first discriminatory paycheck, even though I didn't know it. And even though at that time I had no clue that I was being discriminated against. And Justice Ginsburg said, they don't understand what it's like in the real world. And she said, Congress, the ball is in your court. It's up to you to change this law back, because it's necessary for the people across this country. And from May of 07, when that verdict came out, until the July, there were over 300 cases that judges just threw out based on the 180-day technicality. So it was not only for the women, but it was for everybody across this nation. And the Lilly Ledbetter story has stayed so popular, not because I'm anyone special. I'm still that ordinary girl from Possum Trot, Alabama, that big cotton when I was a kid. But it touches you. It touches each one of you in this audience tonight. You've got a mother, you've had a mother that either worked, an aunt, a daughter, a granddaughter, or your son-in-law, or your daughter-in-law. It touches everybody. And when you talk about women and their wages, you're talking about the American family. And one other point I want to add, that I'm so proud of about the Ledbetter bill, it was sponsored and co-sponsored by Republicans as well as Democrats. Because when you talk about equality in pay and livelihood across this nation, our country is sinking. And it's sinking simply because of the lack of women being paid equitably and fairly for their work. The senior women are the senior most people in the senior level. We're outliving our spouses by 10 years, and this is hurting our country too, because families who are trying to maintain a family life are having to move others in their homes. But we've got to get our families back on track. And when women tell me in airports they're working 2 jobs and another day on the weekend and they still can't make their payments, there's something wrong in this country. And that's why you union folks are so important. And I want to say to you as a group tonight, I am deeply honored to be here with this great union. Thank you so much.